Hello, so I made some graphics that I never got around to using, but there's still a few here. The almost decimal clock and the almost decimal protractor or compass, and that sort of all links to the meter. So now it's defined. The meter is defined by the speed of light per second. So we have this meter rod. The meter prior to that was going back originally, the meter was going to be based on a pendulum that created a 1 second swing. So that would have been 0.99438 meters to be more precise, but this goes back to the 1640s. For instance, Merrin-Mersenne was one of the first to publish on it. And at standard gravity, that's at 45 degrees north. This same meter defined by a pendulum of exactly 1 second at 45 degrees was so in France, basically the universal measure, that's what meter means measure as in geometry, earth measure. This was going to be the definition of the meter 1790 Talleyrand in France, but also Jefferson and Washington were considering bringing in a new US foot, which would have been 33.146 centimeters, making the yard 99.438, etc., or centimeters, or 0.99438 meters. This was nearly come to pass, but the meter then, prior to the modern definitions, was based on the size of the Earth, and John Charles Laporta was one of those spearheading this movement. And so what they did was they measured the polar circumference of the Earth by taking various measures and then being able to find out the number of degrees. And that, for a while, the meter was defined by the size of the Earth. So 1/4 of the Earth divided by 10 million was the definition of the meter, and it was a part of a movement to make everything metric, basically to wipe out the old imperial system of measures. I grew up in Australia. I was raised on metric. I worked with some old school bosses, and they still worked in feet and inches. I had to relearn. I didn't like it. And then only years later did I come to appreciate the beauty of the imperial system. And there is so much hate to do with the imperial system. Sadly, we don't understand how much knowledge is embedded in there. What's the effort that's gone into create these measures. Metric is very convenient. It's great. I still, use it for ease of use. But the imperial system has so much depth to it that the meter does not have. But that was the definition of the meter, and it was a part of a movement to make everything metric. And we really come close to almost having a metric compass and clock, and this was part of a movement spearheaded by people like John Charles Laporta. So, for instance, he wanted to introduce, and it's still used, it's in there, but it's not well used, it's the gradient or the gon, where we would have divided a circle into 400 instead of 360. So you can see there, to divide it into 10 millions or 10. So each quarter is 1 or 100 for a thousandth, but 1 to 10, the metric system. And that was the principle of the gradient or the gon, where each quarter of the circle would have been 100, and so therefore 400 all the way around, just like as we see here. And he tried to introduce, and thankfully it never took off, was a decimal clock, where it was 10 hours of 100 minutes of 100 seconds. Thankfully it never took off, because I've even heard, so the second is almost a natural unit of time. It's almost like to process a thought, it's like 1 second is a good definition of it. These amount of seconds would have been excellent for doing really complex tiny measurements, but in terms of the human scale, it doesn't calibrate. The second almost does seem to be a perfect measure of human time to grasp before, to calculate, to generate a thought and to think about something. Like 1 second is almost like a good description of it. It's also interesting that there are 72 heartbeats per minute, 60 seconds per minute. There's this 5:6 ratio going on in there as well. So I made these, and now I've got no use for them, so I thought I'd just do a quickie on the almost metric decimalized compass or protractor and the almost decimalized clock. And thankfully how we never got these things. So yeah, so that's what almost come to pass, and yeah, thankfully did not. So cheers and have a good one.